The anteroom smelled of beeswax and cold stone, and Constance Morrow had been alone in it for near a quarter of an hour when the voices began. She was kneeling at the hem of Lady Dorothea's evening gown, a garment of deep plum silk that had required 2 separate fittings and would, she suspected, require a third before the household was satisfied. The candle on the side table threw enough light to work by. The fire had not been lit. Through the wall, the sound of the Earl's sitting room was usually nothing, a door closing, a footstep on the parquet, but tonight the interior door to the study stood a half-inch open, and the voices carried with the particular clarity of stone corridors in autumn. She recognized Lady Dorothea's voice first. It was a voice that had been cultivated like a blade, smooth, unhurried, accustomed to its own authority. "He will not be back before Thursday. I have his letter." A second voice, male, lower, the kind of voice that lived in waiting rooms and made its living, reading words aloud, with no expression of its own. "The document requires his signature, and a witness, my lady. If Lord Alderton returns early—" "Lord Alderton," Lady Dorothea said, "will not return early, and if he should, spät, there is the matter of his character. A man of his reputation does not find sympathetic ears among his father's peers. The codicil itself is properly drawn. The trust redirects the Rosalind portion to your guardianship account, rather than to the estate in general, and the bequest schedule. I am aware of what the codicil contains. I drafted the language. What I require from you is silence and a witness line. Before the end of this week, while my brother-in-law is still capable of holding a pen." A pause. Constance had not moved. Her needle was suspended halfway through the hem. She was aware, with a precision that had nothing to do with thought, of the silver thimble on her right forefinger, the small weight of it, the ridged metal against her skin. She had worn it since her father died. It had been his. "And if Miss Morrow," Spate said. "She is a needlewoman," Lady Dorothea said. "She will not be taken seriously." The door closed. The voices retreated into the study, muffled now, indistinct. Constance remained on her knees for a long moment. The plum silk pooled around her hands, her needle still catching the light. She had understood every word. She understood what a codicil was. Her father had been a schoolmaster. He had read aloud to her from law primers as well as from poetry, because knowledge, he believed, did not sort itself into what a woman needed and what she did not. She understood what Rosalind's portion meant, because she had seen the girl, 7 years old, dark-haired, perpetually ink-stained, running the upper corridor at Ashfield Hall, in a way that suggested the estate was already in some quiet particular hers. She understood that Lady Dorothea intended to redirect that inheritance into her own guardianship before the Earl was too ill to prevent it. She understood that the Viscount Alderton, the heir, the man she had never spoken to, the man the household described as reckless and the modiste's accounts described as punctual, was to know nothing of it. And she understood, with the tired clarity of someone who had been in this position before, that she would not be believed. She finished the hem. She wrapped her thread, replaced her needles in their case, folded the gown over the chair for collection in the morning, and took her candle and her thimble and walked down the servants' corridor to the gate lodge where the housekeeper's cart would take her back to Bath. It was not the distance from Ashfield Hall to the city of Bath that made the 40-minute drive feel long. It was the arithmetic of it, the calculation she kept running against her will. She knew something. The man it concerned did not know it. The woman who was doing the thing would deny it if pressed. There was no document in Constance's hands, no name she could offer, nothing but her own ears and her own understanding, and those had been weighed once before against the word of a woman of quality, and found wanting. She held the thimble. She pressed her thumb into the hollow of it, the small brass cup her father had turned smooth at the rim. The night came on around the cart. Constance Morrow had come to Mrs. May, Penelope Wick's establishment on Milsom Street in the February of the previous year, and she had come with 3 things: a letter of reference from a vicar who had known her father, a bundle of sample work in fine-gauge needle and drawn thread, and a record she did not discuss. The reference and the samples had been enough for Mrs. Beer. Wick, who was a woman of 60 with blunt hands and a capacity for understanding character, in the same quiet way she understood a poorly structured bodice, by looking at what was load-bearing and what was merely ornamental. She had examined the samples, asked 2 precise questions about the herringbone join at a silk seam, and offered Constance employment at a living wage and a room on the upper floor. The record Constance did not discuss concerned a position she had held for 8 months at Harley House in Wiltshire, in the service of Lady Fanshawe. She had been a lady's maid and occasional seamstress, elevated enough above trade to sit at table with the upper servants, low enough below the family to be invisible in the rooms where they moved. She had been dismissed in October of the previous year on a charge of having taken a brooch from Lady Fanshawe's dressing table. The brooch had been later found in the lining of a different woman's apron. The finding had been communicated to Constance by letter 2 months after her dismissal, with no offer of reinstatement and no retraction of the public statement Lady Fanshawe had made to the household. The letter had been signed by the housekeeper, not by Lady Fanshawe herself, because Lady Fanshawe had not found the discovery significant enough to require her personal attention. Constance had folded the letter and placed it in her father's copy of Blackstone, where it still resided, between the chapters on property law and the chapters on evidence. It was a useful position for it. The proximity to those particular texts had done nothing to soften the knowledge it contained, but it had organized it. She had understood after Lady Fanshawe that her word and a gentlewoman's word did not occupy the same register. This was not a complaint. It was a fact of the world as it operated, and Constance had no patience for facts that disguised themselves as complaints. She had been trained by her father to read clearly, and what she read, in the gap between what had actually happened and what had been believed, was a lesson she intended to remember. She had not, however, expected to need it again so soon. She told Mrs. Wick about Ashfield Hall on the morning after the fitting. She sat at the work table with her hands flat on the cutting board, and said in a plain, level voice what she had heard through the study door. Mrs. Wick listened without expression. She poured 2 cups of tea and gave one to Constance and held the other in both hands, and was quiet for a moment that lasted precisely as long as it needed to. "You will go to the Viscount," she said. "I do not know that he will see me. Then you will leave him a note, and if the note does not reach him, you will find another way." She set down her cup. "You know what you heard, Constance. I know what you heard from your face. The question is not whether you were right to hear it. The question is what you do with it next." She had seen the Viscount Alderton at Ashfield Hall, though she had never spoken to him. He was the kind of man who was not announced by his entrance, who moved through his own house, as though uncertain it wished to receive him. She had seen him from the servants' corridor on 2 occasions, and on both she had formed the impression of a man carrying something heavy at a polite distance from anyone who might notice. He was 31 years old, according to the household ledger she had briefly held, while the housekeeper totaled the commission accounts. He had a lean, angular face and dark eyes, and the particular quality of stillness in a tall man that suggests he has learned, over time, that the alternative is something worse. On the first occasion she saw him, he had been crossing the upper hall with a small, dark-haired girl on his shoulders. Rosalind, clearly, in a pinafore with a torn hem that wanted mending, and the girl had been laughing, and the Viscount had not been laughing, precisely, but his face had done something careful and complicated, something that a stranger would have missed entirely, and that Constance had seen because she had been watching from the shadows of the corridor. On the second occasion he had been alone in the garden at dusk, standing at the edge of the kitchen garden wall, and he had not moved for so long that she had looked away, and then looked back, wondering if she had been mistaken about the figure. He was not reckless. Lady Dorothea's portrait of him was wrong. But that was the kind of thing a needlewoman would say. And needlewomen, as Constance had lately been reminded, were not taken seriously. The note she left for the Viscount Alderton was written on plain paper in her clearest hand. She had composed it with care, avoiding the words that would make her sound like a woman who was frightened, which she was, and the words that would make her sound like a woman with a grievance against the family, which she did not have. She stated what she had heard, She named the date and the hour and the room. She folded the note and sealed it with a plain wax wafer and addressed it to Lord Alderton by his proper form. And she gave it to the groom who collected Mrs. Wick's delivery cart the following morning, with an additional shilling and a precise request that it be delivered to the Viscount personally. The groom, she later learned, had been intercepted at the gate lodge by the steward, a man named Lord Denholm, who collected all correspondence for the family, when the Viscount was from the house, which he was. Lord Denholm had the note, she imagined. Still, she called at the house herself 2 days later on the pretext of a final fitting adjustment and asked at the door to speak with the Viscount. She was directed instead to Lord Denholm, who received her in the morning room with a kind of official courtesy that is designed to communicate very precisely that the person receiving it has no standing. "Lord Alderton is not at present in the house," Lord Denholm said. "If you have a concern related to your commission work, I am able to receive it." "My concern is not related to my commission," Constance said. "Then I am afraid I am not the appropriate recipient. I would prefer to speak to the Viscount directly." Lord Denholm set down his pen. He was a methodical man of 50, which meant he had spent 50 years having his patients not inconvenienced by the concerns of needlewomen. "Miss Morrow," he said, "Lord Alderton is expected to return on Thursday. If you wish to leave a communication, I will ensure it is placed with his correspondence. I left a communication 3 days ago." A brief pause. "I am not aware of any such communication." "I am aware that you are not," she said. And then she stopped, because she could see from his face that she had lost already. Not because she was wrong, because of what she was. She was escorted to the side entrance. She walked back down the Ashfield Drive, with the October trees, bare on either side, and the sound of gravel under her boots, and at the gate, she put her hand in her pocket and found the thimble and held it until the gate was behind her. What she did not see, because she had not looked back, was the window of the first-floor gallery, where a figure had paused beside the casement. Edward Cavendish had returned that morning a day early by a different road, because the visit to his friend in Gloucestershire had ended badly, in the way that visits always ended when a man carried something unspoken and his friends could not name it. He had been crossing the gallery when the movement below caught his eye. He had seen a young woman in a plain grey mantle walking with the particular posture of someone who has been dismissed from a room and intends not to show it. He had seen her pause at the gate, her back to him, and do something with her right hand in her pocket, a small private gesture he could not name, and then she had passed through the gate and was gone into the lane. He had stood at the window for a moment longer than was useful. He found her 4 days later. Not because the note had reached him, it had not. He came because Rosalind, who at 7 years old had not yet learned to confine her intelligence to subjects that were welcome, mentioned at breakfast that the pretty lady with the silver thimble had been at the house. She had a thimble on her right hand the whole time she was measuring, Rosalind said, not the fitting kind, an old one. She let me hold it. Edward looked at his ward across the breakfast table. Rosalind ate a piece of toast with the focused attention she brought to everything, and did not look up. "When was she here?" he said. "Before you came back. And then again a few days ago. She asked for you. Denholm sent her away." She considered. "I watched from the landing. He went to the modiste establishment on Milsom Street the following afternoon. He did not send a card. He arrived, which was a particular choice he did not examine too closely. The shop had bow windows and a painted sign and 3 steps up from the pavement, and it smelled, when he pushed open the door, of warm wool and lavender, and something faintly of cedar. The woman who came from the back was not Mrs. Wick. She was young and fine-featured, and she was carrying a length of ivory damask over one arm. And when she saw him, she stopped. The damask did not fall. She had good hands. "Lord Alderton," she said. Her voice was level, not quite neutral, the voice of someone who had decided before the moment arrived how she would receive it. "Miss Morrow." He crossed to her in 4 steps, and then stopped at a proper distance and waited, because he had learned that waiting often produced what movement did not. Outside, The rain had begun. There was a sound of it on the bow window glass. "Come inside, Miss Morrow," he said, "out of the draft." She moved back from the threshold into the body of the shop. Mrs. Wick appeared briefly at the interior doorway, assessed the situation with the precision of a woman who had been reading rooms for 60 years, and withdrew. "You left a note," he said. "It did not reach you." "No. I know that now. I would hear it from you directly." She set the damask on the cutting table. She smoothed the edge of it once with her palm, a gesture that was almost entirely composed, except that the gesture was not necessary, and she knew it, and he saw her know it. Then she looked at him. She told him what she had heard through the study door. She told it plainly, in order, without dramatizing it. The codicil, the trust, Rosalind's portion redirected to Lady Dorothea's guardianship account, Spate's involvement, the intention to have the Earl sign it before Edward returned. She named the date and the hour. She told it in the same order it had occurred. He listened without interruption. His face was still, not closed, she thought, but held, the way a face looks when a man is listening to something he does not want to be true, and is not yet certain it is not. When she finished, there was a silence. The rain on the glass. "You are sure of what you heard," he said. "I am sure of what I heard." He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Not suspiciously, with a kind of attention that had nothing impolite in it but was more thorough than she had expected. "You told Denholm. Denholm told me I had no standing to make an accusation. That is Denholm's way." He paused. "It is not mine." She did not answer immediately, because she did not entirely believe it yet. "I do not dismiss you, Miss Morrow," he said. His voice was low, and the words were level, and she could not tell if that meant he credited her or was still deciding. "There are things about my father's estate arrangements that I have not examined closely." A pause. "I owe you an honest accounting of what I find," she said. "I did not come to you because I expected to be owed anything, my lord. I came because the alternative was to have said nothing." He looked at her again, that quality of careful attention. Then he said, "I know. That is why I am here." He returned to the shop 3 days later. Not alone this time. Rosalind was with him, which was either a calculated choice or simply the truth of how his days were organized, and Constance found she could not tell which, and that this uncertainty was in itself informative. Mrs. Wick took the child to examine a bolt of green wool with the seriousness it deserved, and Constance and Edward Cavendish sat in the 2 chairs near the window where clients waited for their fittings, which were not intended for extended conversation, but were the only seating the front room offered. He had been to the estate records. He told her this without preamble. He had spent 2 days reading documents in his father's study that he had not previously troubled to read, not out of laziness, he said, but because his father had not wished to burden him with the estate's legal details until the inheritance was formally his. He had found no reference to any codicil. He had found no correspondence with Spate about a trust. He had found a letter from Spate to his father 6 months old that referenced the guardianship matter without further specification. "That is not proof," he said. "No," Constance agreed. "But it is a thread." He looked out the bow window at the street. "My father is ill. His mind is still sound, but his energy is not, and he is not always attended by someone he trusts." A pause. "I have sent a letter to his independent solicitor, a man named Thomas Grail, who has handled his personal affairs for 20 years and who is not connected to Spate. I am waiting for a reply." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "You believe me, I am not in the habit of disbelieving direct accounts from people who have no evident motive to fabricate them," he said. And then, after a pause, "And Rosalind?" "Liked your thimble." It was the closest thing to warmth she had heard from him. She recognized the difficulty of it, the cost of it, in a man who had learned to keep warmth at a distance. She found herself asking, and she had not planned to ask, "How long have you had her, Rosalind?" Something shifted in his face. It was not exactly pain. It was the thing that lives next door to pain in a man who has been hosting it for a long time and has run out of ways to close the door on it. 3 years, he said. Since my brother died. She waited. It was a riding party, he said. I organized it. My brother was a poor horseman. He had been all his life, and I chose a route that was ambitious, because that is what I did then. Chose the ambitious thing, the dramatic thing. There was a gully crossing. His horse shied. He was thrown. He looked at his hands. I have been told repeatedly that it was an accident. I know it was an accident. I have not been able to make the knowing and the feeling agree. The rain was back. It came against the glass softly, and the shop was warm, and Constance sat with what he had said for a moment before she answered. I was dismissed from my previous post, she said, on a charge of theft. I did not take what I was accused of taking. The brooch was found 2 months later, in another woman's apron. I was told this by letter. Lady Fanshawe did not retract what she had said to the household. She paused. I know I did not take it. I have not been able to make the knowing and the feeling agree. He looked at her then, a different kind of looking than before. If you have been waiting for the moment when two people understand each other without the ceremony of it, this was that moment. The rain did its quiet work on the glass. Rosalind's voice carried through the partition, informing Mrs. Wick with great seriousness that green was her favorite color, and always had been. She talks too much, Edward said. She is 7, Constance said. Yes, he said, and something in his face did the careful, complicated thing she had seen from the servants' corridor, the thing that a stranger would have missed. She was not a stranger now. If Constance's story moves you, if you have ever held something true that no one was willing to receive, stay close. What comes next is the moment the cost arrives. She went back to the work. He took Rosalind home. 2 days passed. 3. She received no word from him, and she told herself this was reasonable, that men of his station did not report their movements to seamstresses in Bath, and she told herself she had not been expecting him to, and the distance between these two things she managed by keeping her hands busy and her mind on the work. On the 5th evening, a carriage arrived at the modist's shop at 6 o'clock, and a footman delivered a note addressed to her in a hand she did not recognize. It was from Lord Denholm, and it requested her presence at Ashfield Hall the following morning. It did not state a reason. Its tone was the kind of official neutrality that contains, for those who know how to read it, a moderate degree of hostility. She went. Mrs. Wick offered to come with her. Constance said she would go alone because there was nothing that two of her could accomplish that one could not, and the presence of a witness would signal that she anticipated difficulty, and she did not wish to signal that yet. The hall was full when she arrived. Not a formal gathering precisely, but there were house guests for the weekend, a collection of the family's connections, assembled for the Earl's name day, which had been quietly moved forward because the Earl's health was uncertain. She was shown to the small sitting room off the morning room, which was separated from the larger drawing room by a pair of doors, and told to wait. Lady Dorothea came in 10 minutes later, followed by Lord Denholm, and at a discreet distance Mr. Spate. She was dressed for the day's social requirements in a deep burgundy morning gown, her silver hair arranged with the assurance of a woman who has never needed to think about how she looks, because looking right has always been part of the arrangement. She sat down opposite Constance without offering a chair, which communicated a great deal about the category of conversation this was. "Miss Morrow," she said, "I will be direct. It has come to my attention that you have been repeating to certain members of this household an account of a conversation you claim to have overheard during your last visit." Constance said, "I repeated what I heard. Accurately. You heard, I have no doubt, fragments of a conversation about a private family matter. Fragments without context are easily misunderstood." She paused. "I am asking you, for your own sake, to leave this alone." "For my own sake," Constance said. "Miss Wick's establishment depends in some part on the patronage of families in this district. I would not wish any misunderstanding to affect that relationship. It was a threat. It was delivered in the correct tones of gracious concern. Constance looked at the window and thought about her father's law primer and the chapter on evidence, and she thought about the copy of the dismissal letter sitting in it, and she thought about what it felt like to know the truth and have it mean nothing. Lord Alderton appeared in the doorway. He had not been announced. He had simply arrived the way he did, with that particular quality of controlled stillness. He stopped. He looked at the configuration of the room, his aunt, Denholm, Spate, and Constance alone, and something in his face went very quiet and very careful. Then the door to the drawing room opened, and beyond it, Constance could see the assembled houseguests, and she understood that this had been arranged. Lady Dorothea stood and moved to the threshold, and her voice carried into the drawing room without effort. "I must explain a small domestic matter," Lady Dorothea said. "We have had a young woman, employed by our modiste, who has somewhat exceeded her station. The girl is a needlewoman, and needlewomen hear what they want to hear. Lord Denholm has settled the matter. The drawing room received this." There was a murmur, brief and social, the kind of sound a gathering makes when it confirms its own understanding of the world. Constance stood. She stood because it was the only thing left to do that did not require anyone else. She looked at the Viscount, and for one moment she read in his face something she had not expected, not disbelief, not dismissal, but a particular anguish, the anguish of a man who knows the truth, and is not yet in a position to say so publicly, without the evidence in his hands. She saw him. She saw the cost of what he was holding, and she understood it, and she almost forgave it. Almost. She walked out. She crossed the hall. She went through the side entrance. She walked the drive. At the gate she did not stop to hold the thimble. She kept walking until the hall was entirely behind her, and the lane opened into the city road, and then she kept walking still. She told Mrs. Wick that evening. Not everything. She did not need to tell everything. Mrs. Wick had a talent for arithmetic that required only the key numbers. She said that Lady Dorothea had addressed the assembled houseguests. She said that Lord Alderton had been present and had said nothing. Mrs. Wick was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did he know what she was going to do?" "I do not know." "Do you believe he did?" Constance thought about his face in the doorway, the anguish of a man with something still unresolved in his hands. "No," she said. "But the distinction between not knowing and not preventing is not one I am prepared to find entirely comfortable." Mrs. Wick refilled her cup. Outside, it was dark. The shop was closed. The workroom smelled of cut fabric and tallow. "You understand what you heard, Constance," she said. "That has not changed. What I understand and what can be demonstrated are not the same thing." "Not yet," Mrs. Wick said. The letter arrived 2 mornings later, and it was not from Edward. It was from Thomas Grayle, solicitor of Lincoln's Inn, London, addressed to Mrs. Wick's establishment in Constance's name. How he had known to write to her there, she did not immediately understand. She opened it at the work table with her seam ripper as a letter knife and read it twice. Grayle had been engaged by Lord Alderton to review the late correspondence pertaining to the Earl's estate. He had obtained, through a contact at the offices of Spate and Partners, a copy of the document described as a codicil to the Earl of Ashfield's will. He had noted in the review process that the witness attestation on the document bore a seal that differed in one particular from the seal registered to his own office in the Earl's personal file. The Earl's original solicitor's seal, that is, Mr. Grayle's own seal, used a particular spacing in the legend that the reproduced version had not exactly replicated. The document, in Mr. C. Grayle's professional assessment, had not been witnessed by anyone whose name appeared on it. Constance read this sentence a 3rd time. It was not only that the document was false, it was that the document was demonstrably false. To a man who knew what a seal ought to look like, it was visibly false. Spate had reproduced the outward appearance of legitimacy without the precision it required, because Spate had assumed that no one who mattered would look closely enough. She was reading the letter a 4th time when the shop bell rang. She put the letter in her apron pocket and went to the front. The Viscount was on the doorstep. He was not in his carriage. He was on horseback, which meant he had come directly. Without the time that a carriage allows a man to compose himself, he was in a state that suggested composition had not been the priority. "Miss Morrow," he said. She opened the door wider. "Come inside," she said, because the rain had begun again, and because she had said it last time and had not regretted it. He came in. Mrs. Wick appeared and disappeared again, in the same unhurried sequence she always performed when she was giving the room to someone who needed it. He pulled off his gloves. He turned to face her. "I have Grail's letter," he said. "I have it as well." She took the letter from her apron. He stared at it. She said, "He wrote to me directly. I asked him to. You are the witness." He paused. "You are the only witness who heard the conversation from the beginning. Grail can demonstrate the document is fraudulent. He cannot demonstrate the intent without your account of what was said in that study." She looked at him. He was not making this easy. He was not attempting to make it easy, which was, she realized, a particular kind of respect. "You let her speak in front of the drawing room," she said. "I know." The words were level and quiet, and they carried their own weight. I did not know what she intended until it had already happened. By the time I understood what she had arranged, the audience, the timing, the public statement, I had not enough proof to contradict it. I had only your word and a letter of inquiry I had sent to London, and I knew precisely what the value of your word was in that room. And I knew that, without more, I would be placing you in a worse position, not a better one if I spoke. A pause. "That is an explanation, not an excuse." "I know the difference," she said. He looked at her with the same attention he had used in the shop, the first time. That quality of seeing that did not hurry itself and did not apologize for its thoroughness. She was aware of exactly where he was standing, which was closer than it had been a moment ago. She had not seen him move. Her pulse was doing something that had no connection to the legal question. "I need you to come back to Ashfield Hall," he said. "Today. Grail will be there by 3 o'clock. I need you in the room when he presents the document." She said, "She will try again with the room." "Yes." "And you will not let her?" "No," he said. "I will not." She took her mantle from the hook. He watched her put it on, and there was something in how he watched that was not simply impatience or legal urgency. She could not name it precisely, only that it was there, only that it had been there since the first afternoon, and that she had been declining to examine it, because the examination felt like a luxury she had not earned. Grail was a compact man of 55, with gray temples, and the unhurried manner of someone who had been reading documents for 30 years, and had learned that urgency was rarely as productive as accuracy. He arrived at Ashfield Hall at 5 minutes to 3, which was punctual without being early. He brought with him a leather case and a junior colleague who had ink on his left cuff. Constance stood beside Edward in the entrance hall when Grail arrived, and she saw the solicitor take in their relative positions without any adjustment of expression. Lady Dorothea had been told that Lord Alderton wished to discuss the estate with the family solicitor. She was in the drawing-room when they entered, arranged at the writing desk near the fire with a composure that had the quality of preparation. Spate was in the chair near the window. The weekend's houseguests were present, 6 people, family connections and local peers, who had been at dinner when she had made her statement about needlewomen, who had nodded or looked politely away and had not considered that they might be called to remember what they had witnessed. They were present now. Grail set his case on the writing table. He opened it. He removed a document and placed it beside a second document, his own sealed original, the Earl's existing will, and he set both before Lady Dorothea with the practiced precision of a man who has done this before, who knows exactly what a person's face does when they see the comparison. He said, in the mild tone of a man reading a weather report, that the codicil's witness attestation bore a seal that differed from the registered seal of record in 3 specific particulars. He named the particulars. He placed a glass over both seals and invited the room to look. Lord Denholm leaned in first. He looked for a long moment. When he straightened, his face had changed. Lady Dorothea did not lean in. She said, This is a professional misunderstanding between my lady, Grail said. He did not raise his voice. He simply continued, "The document as executed is not a valid codicil to the Earl of Ashfield's will. The witness attestation is not authentic. I have a statement to this effect prepared for the Earl's review, to which I will add any response the family wishes to make, and I will be petitioning the court for review of any related guardianship instruments affected by this." "The girl's guardianship is a separate matter entirely," Lady Dorothea said, and her voice had risen by 1/2 step. "No more." But the half-step was visible. "The guardianship instrument and the codicil were drawn by the same office," Grail said. "At the same time, I will be examining both." The room was very quiet. One of the house guests, a Mrs. Pry, Felton, who had nodded during Lady Dorothea's remarks and was now sitting very still, cleared her throat. The Viscount crossed the room to where Constance stood. He moved with the steady economy of a man who knows exactly where he is going, and has decided not to hurry, in a way that looks like haste. He stopped beside her, facing the room, and he said, "Miss Morrow told the truth. I witnessed it. That is enough." The room received this. Mrs. Felton set down her cup. Lord Denholm looked at the window. Spate, in his chair by the fire, did not stand up, but became a slightly smaller version of himself. Lady Dorothea said nothing. She looked at her nephew, not with anger, not precisely, but with the expression of a woman whose understanding of the world has encountered something it could not have predicted, and who has not yet decided what to do with the information. She looked at Constance, and then, with a deliberateness that acknowledged, in its own way, everything it could not undo, she looked away. The formal proceedings took the remainder of that afternoon and most of the following day. Grail met with the Earl, who was alert and precise, and who listened to the account of the codicil with an expression that suggested he was not entirely surprised, which was, in its own way, its own particular sorrow. Spade and partners withdrew from the family's representation. Lady Dorothea remained at Ashfield Hall for a further week, by which point the social calendar of the district had been comprehensively informed of the situation by the natural operations of its own apparatus, and she withdrew to her house in Bristol with a quietness that was itself a statement. Rosalind's guardianship was examined and confirmed, as Edward's had always legally been Edward's, a fact the codicil had attempted to obscure by creating a trust structure that would have made his formal guardianship nominal. Grail filed the relevant petitions. The Earl signed 3 documents in his own firm hand, and told Grail that he was grateful for thorough young men, and then looked at Edward, and did not say anything else, because some accountings do not require speech. Constance returned to Mrs. Wick's shop. She returned because there was work to finish, and because she was not someone who waited for the world to reorganize itself, and then walked into the new arrangement without her own momentum. She finished a set of wedding shifts. Commissioned in September, she completed a Spencer jacket in sapphire wool that had been pending since the 2nd week of October. She was 3 hours into the Spencer jacket when she heard the shop bell. She was in the back workroom. She did not go to the front immediately because Mrs. Wick was already there, and because the Spencer jacket was at a point in its construction that benefited from consistent attention. But then, Mrs. Wick appeared at the workroom doorway and said, "Lord Alderton," in a tone that was not quite her usual tone, and Constance set down the Spencer jacket. He was alone. He had sent the carriage elsewhere and come on foot, which meant he had walked from wherever his carriage had deposited him, through the November city, with the deliberateness of a man who wanted the distance to think in. He stood in the front room of the shop with his hat in his hands, and a quality about him that was different from the previous times. The control was still there. It would always be there. She thought it was constitutive of him, but it had loosened at one point, or several, like a coat that has been worn long enough to take the wearer's shape. "Miss Morrow," he said. And then he stopped. She waited. Outside, the November wind came against the glass. "I have not," he said, "been in the practice of thanking people. I understand this to be a deficiency. Rosalind has pointed it out, specifically in reference to herself, on several occasions." He paused. "She has also asked whether the pretty lady with the silver thimble will be coming to Ashfield for Christmas." Constance's hands, which had been completely still, did something she did not authorize. They found the thimble in her pocket. They closed around it. "I'm asking something different," he said. "I am asking whether the lady in question might consider a future visit to Ashfield Hall that was not connected to a commission and was not for the purpose of reporting a crime, whether she might consider it in the context of—" He stopped. He looked at his hat. He was not, she realized, as composed as she had thought. He was as composed as he was capable of being, which was not the same thing. "Whether she might consider it in the context of a particular hope, I have not been in the habit of permitting myself." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You are doing this very badly." "Yes," he said. "I know." And the something in his face did the careful, complicated thing, the thing she had first seen from the servants' corridor. And this time she was close enough to see it fully, and it was not what she had thought it was in the corridor. It was not the restraint of a man keeping warmth at a distance. It was the restraint of a man who was afraid the warmth would not be received and was offering it anyway. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. She put the thimble on the cutting table beside her. "Yes," she said simply, and without ceremony, because some things did not require ceremony. "I will come for Christmas." He looked at her. He raised one hand, and then did not quite do what he had been about to do, and she understood this, and she understood what it would cost him, and she said, "Edward," he said, "Constance." It was the first time. In his voice, her name sounded like something that had been waiting in a room for a long time, and was now simply home. They stood at a proper distance. He still had his hat. Outside, the first snow of the season came quietly down on the city of Bath, settling on the bow window glass with the particular silence of new things. Rosalind was at Ashfield Hall, almost certainly informing someone at length about the superiority of green. The Earl was sleeping in his room with the window cracked, which was his habit. The cold air and the warmth of the fire reaching an equilibrium, the room had always been suited for. Constance picked up the thimble. She turned it once in her hand, the small brass cup, the ridged rim her father had worn smooth. She put it back in her pocket. Some things do not need to be explained. The weight of them carried long enough becomes so familiar that the carrying itself is a kind of answer. If Constance's story found you where you needed it, leave a word below. The best kind of word is a true one,